fixed upon us. They have tricked you into thinking that choosing your own master is the same as being free. They have the power that they have because we treat them as if they are our rightful masters. Like they own us. They are men, mortal men. So their pretty words have fooled you. If you do not free your minds from their lies, you can never free your bodies. Freedom is ours the moment we claim it. We can change things. They have love them.
Peace, peace. Happy Sunday, people. Welcome to Yemima's World, the Jelly Moose's Cafe. I am your hostess, Yemima, and it is good to be black in the land of the living once again. This is going to be a hot button topic today. You can tell by the short video clip and also by the title of this episode. How the Black Church Supports Whyte Terrorists. And I'm going to tie it in with politics because that's how the Black Church supports white terrorism. I refuse to call them white supremacists because that's not what they are. There's nothing supreme about them. They are homegrown terrorists. And so I will choose to use those words. But we're going to go back. This is how the Black Church, and not all Black churches, certainly not all, but too many of them do. I won't lump together all of the Black churches because, again, it's not all, but it's enough to make a difference in our keeping us oppressed and keeping Black people on the bottom of the totem pole. So let's go back to slavery. Let's go back to, and I'll this will explain the clip. So let's go back to slavery. On the forced labor camps, I'm not going to call them plantations because that's not what they were. On the forced labor camps, they would preach specific things from the Bible. Now, because we could not, the majority of us could not read English, we don't know what they had in the Bible. When they did allow us to read, that was the only book that we could read, was the Bible. Now, it has been brought to our attention in recent years that there was something called the Slave Bible, and they took out different passages from the Bible talking about freedom and, when Moses freed those that were slaves in Egypt. So those passages were taken out, and the ones that they left in and repeatedly preached was from the New Testament about slaves obeying your earthly masters, and you would do, work for them as if you worked for Jesus. So those passages will remain in the Bible, and those are the ones that they would preach. And so even though the white preachers would preach that, it still wasn't getting through to those that they were enslaving. And so what they would do is they would get a Black person and train them to preach. And they would have to preach, slaves obey your masters and things of that nature. But a lot of them would preach that on Sunday afternoon to the slaves. But on Saturday evenings, when they would go down to the brush harbors and have their own uh, quote unquote church services, those same preachers would preach from the Old Testament stories they had heard the white preachers talking about liberation and things of that nature, and they would preach those passages to those. And a lot of those that were enslaved would take that to heart, and yes, they would self emancipate and self liberate themselves. Nat Turner is a prime example of having to preach on Sundays to the slaves about obeying their earthly masters and this, that, and the other. The white people understood that Nat had an intelligence about him, and they thought that they could use that intelligence in their best interest, that he would preach this thing. And he did for a while. He went to different churches and he would preach what they wanted him to preach. But Nat Turner was a child of African spirituality. So that wasn't going to last long. And it got to the point where he was reading Revelation, and he was reading books from the Old Testament talking about, freedom and liberation and things of that nature. And then he turned the tables on them and started preaching from those things. And that's when the revolution, the rebellion took place, and they set out and unalived quite a few white people. So he learned to use the book, their playbook against them. Denmark Vesey, same thing. Denmark Vesey was a student of the gospel at Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina, and he also was one of the ones that they would get to go out and talk to the black people about obeying your master and this, that, and the other. And he was also a child of African spirituality. One of his closest friends was a man named Gullah Jack, who was a child of Haitian voodoo. So he got tired of preaching that garbage, and he started preaching about liberation and things of that nature. And that's when the Denmark Vesey rebellion took place. And that's only two. There were quite a few black preachers at that time who taught liberation and talked about freedom. And when emancipation finally came, now the clip that you see is from a movie called Jones Plantation. It is available on Tubi, and it's deep. It's deep because what they do is they get a black man to come from a another plantation. He's a free black man, and he's working for the colonizers and teaching their slaves, those that they enslaved, uh, sharecropping. So basically, he introduces sharecropping. We know that sharecropping was simply another form of slavery, where he convinced them that they owned equal parts of the plantation, and they had to work extremely hard so that they could have an equal share of the grand harvest. And what you see in the clip is one of the people on the plantation found out this is some bullshit, and decides to come before the people and let them know, we ain't free. They keep saying, with their pretty words, they keep saying we ain't free, and they're giving us a chance to choose our own master, which is what we'll be doing in November. We will be choosing our own master again, and we unfortunately have not much to choose from, but we're going to have to choose the lesser of the two evils. So which one of our masters is going to give us an extra helping of food on Sundays, as opposed to not giving us anything at all? So that's kind of what we're faced with in November. Um, we do know that one of the masters that we have to choose from is pure evil, and if that master goes in, we're all going to be back out in the fields again. So unfortunately, we have to choose the lesser of the two evils. Which one of our masters are we going to be in the house, and which one are we going to be in the hot sun in the fields? So that's what that clip is. It's from, again, the movie is called Jones Plantation, and it is available on Tubi. Now, back to the black church and supporting white terrorism. You did have some black preachers on the plantation who truly believed in what the white man told them to preach. They truly, truly believed that they were chosen by God to be slaves. They truly believed that there is a mansion on the other side of heaven that Jesus is going to give to them for being good slaves. So a lot of that was preached as well. When emancipation came and we were able to have our own churches, now, even during slavery, we had our own praise houses, we had our own prayer houses, and things of that nature. And usually in those praise houses and prayer houses and brush harbors, we congregated to talk about how to liberate ourselves and how to beat the colonizers and how to get away from them. That's what a lot of things took place in those prayer houses and praise houses. When emancipation came, we still had our prayer houses and our praise houses. And then we were still meeting in some places in the brush harbors. And then eventually we were able to build our own churches. And that's what we did. We built black churches. And even then, our black churches represented freedom. Uh, they represented education, community, things of that nature. So the black church in those times was everything for us. We could go to the black church Monday through Friday and be educated. The children went to the black churches to go to school because we didn't have public schools that we could go to right after emancipation. The only place you could learn was in the black church. We were educating, and it wasn't just education on the Bible. We were teaching our children how to read, how to write, how we were teaching young women how to cook, how to keep house. We were teaching men who may not have had, the only skill they may have had would have been out in the fields, teaching them other skills. Those who had been blacksmiths on the plantation were teaching blacksmithing. Those that had been, oh, I don't know, drivers were teaching driving, whatever it was, whatever skill they had on the plantation. If somebody in the church lacked that skill, it was kind of a barter system. I'll train you to do that, you train me to do this, so that the community could grow and thrive and be free. That was the black church at that time, right out of emancipation. Even into the 20s and 30s and 40s, that was the job of the black church. We were still educating, we were still teaching. And again, it didn't always have to do with religion. We didn't spend 4 hours in the church talking about how Jesus was going to bless you. As a matter of fact, we didn't really talk about Jesus at all. That wasn't what the black church was about. It was about community. It didn't change into the support of white terrorism until probably the 50s, when the civil rights movement really began. Black churches was getting money from the government, not to talk about liberation, not to talk about civil rights, not to talk about equality, not to talk about protest, not to talk about any of those things. And they reverted right back to those old time plantation preachers who were forced to talk about slaves obey your earthly masters. And those descendants of those plantation preachers walked in their ancestors' footsteps and started preaching the same bullshit. They deterred people, black people. A lot of churches deterred black people from voting. A lot of them would tell black people, you know, that if you vote, you could lose your job, this, that, and the other. So a lot of black churches deterred black people from voting. Think about it. Where do politicians go when it's time to vote? To the black church. When Vernon Johns was a minister, when he was a preacher, he was very, very, very controversial. He talked about civil rights. He talked about black people voting. He talked about freedom and liberation in black communities coming together to support each other. And they didn't like him. They hated Vernon Johns at his church. They hated him because they felt like he was putting a target on black people's back as if they didn't already have one. And when Vernon John was kicked out of the church that he had pastored for a very long time, they replaced him with Dr. King, not understanding or realizing that he had basically the same ideas as Vernon John. And when Dr. King, at the height of the civil rights movement, when he was America's black pastor, there were probably more churches that didn't follow him than the ones that did. They didn't like him talking about black people equality. They didn't like him talking about votes. They didn't like him talking about protesting. They didn't like him talking about anything that had to do with black liberation and black freedom. And so he didn't have, people think that he had a lot of black churches that followed him. No. If Dr. King was alive today, or in the last 20 years, if he had been alive and he was saying the same things that he did back then and he was to say them now, the majority of black people would not agree with him. And so I get confused when I see white people quoting him, and they haven't really have no business quoting him because they would have unalived him today just like they did back then. But I see black people quoting him, and I'm like, again, you don't even know any of his speeches other than I Have a Dream. That's the only speech that most black people know. And you certainly would not have supported anything that he said back then, uh, now, because you support white terrorism. So, how do black churches support white terrorists? Well, they, so I want to word this right. Let me get comfortable. So, in Louisiana, they are now forcing public schools to display the Ten Commandments. Most people are saying that that is a no-no because you're teaching religion to people who may not be Christians. Well, let me back up. First of all, the Ten Commandments is from the Jewish faith. It's not even from the Christian faith, from the Jewish faith. The Jewish people authored the Ten Commandments. So I'm not sure I understand why Christians are demanding that it be put up in school. And if they do, it should be written in Hebrew, the original language that it was translated in. Black Christians love it. They love it. Yes, put God back in the school. Yes, put white Jesus back in the school. If they put God back in the school, they wouldn't have all this foolishness in the school. If they put God back in the school, they wouldn't have so of the children acting up and killing each other. Well, let me see if I understand this, because the same God that they want to put back in schools, and he never was taken out, but the same God they want to put back in school is the same God that they had on the plantation. Yet, what did you have on the plantation? Well, you had unaliving, and you had graping, and you had torture, and you had enslavement, all under the banner of the same God that you want put back over your children in school. The same God that white people used as a scapegoat to send Native Americans to camps to strip them of everything that belonged to their culture, their language, their looks, their spirituality. Same God that y'all want to put back in schools. And I say it's the same God because this is the God that white terrorists created. I'm not saying that this is the divine, that this is the source. This is the same God that white terrorists created to put over you and your children to keep you oppressed, docile, and enslaved. And black churches love the fact that they're going to put the Ten Commandments back in school or put God back in school. In Oklahoma, they're now mandating that the Bible be taught as a history class in their public schools. That same God again that was on the plantation, being taught on the plantation, slaves obey your earthly masters. So, what passage do you think they're going to push on our little black children? Do you see what they're doing? Before, teachers couldn't teach about slavery at all. Now they're putting the Bible back in putting the Bible in schools, saying they can teach from the Bible as a history book. And the passage is, slaves obey your earthly masters. So what they're saying is, if you're going to teach about slavery and who the slaves really were, which were black people, then we're going to teach, if they were slaves, slaves obey your earthly masters. Y'all better wake the hell up. The black church has the most power in the United States. There are more black churches in this country than anywhere in the entire world. Even in Africa, there are more black churches in this country. And 9 out of 10 of them subscribe to white terrorism and support white terrorism. Oh, just because you may vote a certain way doesn't mean you don't subscribe to white terrorism. It just means that you vote for other things in other ways to support that. You support white terrorism when you still display a picture of white Jesus in your church. You support white terrorism when you display the American flag in your church, because politics shouldn't even be in the church. You shouldn't even have a flag in your church at all. You support white terrorism when you allow white politicians to come into your church and speak to your congregation. You support white terrorism when you refuse to even acknowledge Black History Month or Juneteenth or MLK's birthday. You support white terrorism when you refuse to even speak about liberation or things going on in your community. You support white terrorism when you don't speak out against injustices because you are afraid that your Black church will lose its funding from the government. And the more you support white terrorism, the further down the totem pole Black people go. Black church was the one thing that we had that we thought they could never take from us. It was a place where we could go and feel safe. It was a place we could go and strategize. It was a place we could go and learn. It was a place where we could go and get references for jobs. It was a place where we could go and have jobs that we could not have in white establishments. It was a place where we could go and felt needed and worthy and wanted. And now it's just a place that we can go and be entertained and a bunch of foolishness going on. And white people love it. They love it. Just like they love the BET Awards. They love when people share videos of Black churches acting a complete fool because they know that your focus is not on anything that it needs to be on. You're not focused on the community, the decline of the community. You're not focused on the black deaths in the community. You're not focused on the Black youth being killed by the patty rollers. You're not focused on Black mothers dying in childbirth. You're not focused on your children not knowing how to read. They're in the eighth grade and reading at a third grade level. You're not focused on any of that. You're focused on catching the Holy Ghost and giving money to the church. When Bishop Charles H. Mason, when he had his church, it was one of the largest Black congregations, and it was a Kojic church. He was a descendant of root workers and hoodoo workers, and his church had businesses. It was a Black Wall Street inside the church, health clinics. And this was in the 1950s? The 1950s. You see mega churches all over this United States, and they're open 2 days a week. Wednesday night or 3 days, Wednesday night Bible study, Thursday night choir rehearsal, and Sunday services. Why not have a health clinic on Saturdays? Doula classes. And that's doula for bringing babies into this world, and doula classes for helping people to exit the physical into the spiritual realm. White churches do. Yeah, they do. All the things that a Black church should have, white churches have. They have those things. And so every time you have an opportunity to uplift, to help your community, and you don't take that opportunity, you are supporting white terrorism. And you are supporting keeping your own community from thriving and from becoming what it should be. There's another documentary called Bad Faith, and it's either on Hulu or Tubi. I think it's on Tubi. But it talks about how the white evangelicals work behind the scenes to get Donald Trump into office uh, when he became president. And it shows how quite a few black churches also work with these white terrorists to get Donald Trump into office. They created a Christian of Donald Trump. He was not a Christian. He knew nothing about the Bible or anything else. These white evangelicals got together and taught him a few words to say to make people think that he was a godly man despite his actions. They would liken him to David, and so many black Christians will do that. They will liken when someone does something that is antithetical to Christianity. They will say, "Oh, he's like a David. You know, David was a man after God's own heart, and David was a rapist, and he was a murderer, and he was also, I believe, bisexual." But they'll overlook all of those things and say, but he was a man after God's own heart. And so when somebody in authority, like a pastor or a bishop or whatever, they'll liken him to David. Well, you know, David did all those things too, but God loved them. Says who? Says the people who wrote the story. The Bible is not a history book. It's not a history book. It's a religious document. All right, that's it. I'm done. I can't say no more. But the black church is going to be the downfall of this country for black people. And it's going to be the entity that keeps supporting and aiding white terrorists. Check out the movie Jones Plantation. See if you can glean anything from it. I hope you do. Check out the documentary Bad Faith. It goes hand in hand with the 2025 manifesto. People keep calling it Project 2025. No, it's a manifesto. So check out Bad Faith and check out that, and also read the 2025 manifesto, and you will see what I am talking about. And Black Church, if you can't get it together for yourself, then for God's sakes, think about your descendants in the next 15, 20 years. Where are they going to be? Where are they going to be? We know the drill. Love yourself, love others. Walk in the spirit of your ancestors. Acknowledge them. Remember them. Speak for them. Speak to them. Give yourself some grace. Give others grace. Stay healthy. Stay cool. And until next time, stay black.